I don't know what kind of a wedding that I want, but I think there's a few things that kind of guide the kind of wedding that I want.
Well, we definitely don't want to do what some people do, which is basically mortgage your future in order to have a $50,000 or $100,000 or $250,000 wedding.
No.
Yeah.
Getting married costs money, and I think it's important to have the money conversation. It's so important. Do not get engaged if you cannot talk about money.
Yeah. How much sex have you had in the last week? Like you just asked that 4 or 5 times for us, right? That's easy. But you asked me how much money, like what's my total net worth?
I don't want to answer that.
Yeah.
It's been one of the most uncomfortable conversations for me to talk about. And it's up there
There was
in
actually
the leading cause
yeah.
of like what causes divorce.
Right.
Welcome to the Interracial Couple Podcast.
Where it's not all black and white.
My name is Sarah. I'm black.
I'm Matthew. I'm white. And today's episode is on engagement.
Yeah.
Or getting engaged.
Should we get engaged?
Should anyone get engaged in this day and age? I guess you need to if you're going to get married.
Yeah.
So that would be a different question.
But should we get engaged?
Should we get engaged?
There have been like a few things that we thought were a good marker for us.
A good marker in order to get engaged. Like
Correct.
when is it the right time?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just didn't want to get engaged. Like we've been talking about being engaged and we've been together for...
We're pushing 4 years. Not quite, but we're getting there. And just kind of as a little disclaimer, I think that the idea of a conversation around engagement is probably like moderately postmodern, right? Because at some point it was like, this wouldn't have been a conversation.
No.
Of course, if you go back not too far, and depending on where you are in the world, you don't live together if you're not married. So by that extension, it's not that, now that we live together before we're married, it's not that big of a stretch to say, we talk about our engagement. It's not like, ooh, I've got the secret and I'm going to surprise you.
No, I don't want you to. I wouldn't mind to be surprised on the engagement aspect, like to be asked, but I wouldn't want anyone to ask me to be engaged to them or to marry them before we've discussed like what the future would look like.
Because do you feel like there's a little bit of agency in that? There's this strange sort of undue power, I almost want to say, that's given to the person who decides when it's time to get engaged.
Yeah, and I think it may be surprising to people who are listening to that I actually would like to be surprised. Like I want to choose like when I want to be engaged, not the actual day. But
like I said, it's kind of part of this agency thing, which is that, yeah, we both want to have an equal say in our relationship. That means that we actually also have an equal say in our marriage, our engagement. And obviously, equality doesn't mean that we don't take on different roles in different ways or take on bigger things in other places, but that it's not like, I'm not going to your, to your uncle or your mother saying, may I have your daughter's hand? Though some people say that's a nice thing to do, and maybe
you should.
Yeah.
Just kidding. But I think we'll get to that part. Let's talk about like the things that were important to us, like over the last 4 years that we've kind of talked about that this would be like important if we were to get engaged and get married.
Right.
So I think one of the things was the sex, like our sex life.
The sex.
The sex.
The big SEX.
Correct. And I think it's so important, like for couples. How many times do we have sex a week? A day?
A day. Well, there are times. Those are good days. Those are good days.
But I think by the time you get to be married, I think, not everyone, some people are religious and they have to wait for religious reasons, but we chose not to wait.
Right.
And so I think for me, it was important that I understand your body and that you understand mine.
Right. And there's also an ease and flow of being able to talk about it, and kind of also even in the world of consent, where we're really shining a light on that consent is so important. One of the things that I think is so important about that is that it actually brings conversation around sex. So it's also not weird to talk about it when we're not having it, or to really kind of and when I say not having it, like not in the moment, but even in the moment to be like, what works for you? Do you like this? Do you not like that? This is what I like, to have this sort of free, open flow, because, sex sometimes can be hard to talk about.
It can be hard to talk about, and there can be trauma around sex.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for both couples to open up about the trauma and the challenges that they have around sex.
Yep.
So
Or hang-ups. I mean, trauma is a big word, which a lot of people do, but even like on a smaller scale, like little hang-ups, or, the social, maybe it's like a voice in your head of sort of social expectations and things like that, right?
yeah, and I think for us that's been important, and for the last for almost 4 years now,
Pushing 4.
we've been having sex, and we know each other's bodies so well at this point.
Yep.
I think we're ready for marriage. And we're ready for sex life to end. But I do have to say that sex does get better with time.
I think so. And I think a lot of it actually has to do with the communication. That's one thing I wanted to say, is that sex can be a hard thing to talk about. Like, if sometimes in the moment, do I want to actually have almost like a intellectual conversation about what I like, or if something is a little bit weird sometimes, or whatever that might be, is that any of the challenges around conversation around sex will pale in comparison to challenges that couples will have once they're married and they're deep in and they're committed. And we're saying, we're doing this for life. And I think that kind of like leads into some of these other things that we'll talk about are important, is that the conversation, the ability to have an easy flow with that is going to be really, really useful down the road when good communication skills become paramount to successfully continuing a marriage.
Yeah. And so we're going to move on to the second thing that we thought was important to talk about and actually do it before we got engaged. And that is talking about money.
Money, which has been difficult. And in fact, I will publicly admit that you and I recorded a podcast about money, and it was so uncomfortable, we threw it away.
Yeah. I was like, I cannot do this. I'm not ready to talk to you about money on the podcast, because it was so uncomfortable for both of us. And I think part of that was like discussing like debt, like what do I owe? What do you owe? How do we
put our money together in a way that feels really respectful of both of us and the efforts that each of us put in, and in different ways. I'm a little bit older than you, and you also while I graduated college later than many. I was in my mid-20s when I graduated. I think it was 26. You were what, 31?
I was 31 when I graduated college.
Okay, 32, 31, 32?
I don't know, 32, 31.
Yeah, but also, so we were both a little bit older when we graduated college, but even still, right? So there are these different things, and you're just starting a business, and anyone who's ever started a business before knows that getting going is really tough. And you've got to go through a lot of bootstrapping, and then you have to make these choices. And when are those choices something that are like that I feel really good about supporting, and you feel good about things that you don't feel good about? And then if I also don't feel good about it, but it's something that you feel is necessary, like I really need to spend money on this thing for my business, but I also need to go get my nails done.
Yeah.
Right. And so like little things like that, like we both have to feel really comfortable, and that can be so hard.
It can be hard. And also because of the way we grew up, we have different money perspectives, and we see money differently in the way to make the money, in ways to keep the money. And I think money is so important for couples to talk about before you get engaged.
Yep.
Because to me, I feel like the engagement is like the doorway to marriage.
Right.
So if you're thinking about being engaged and spending money, engagement costs a lot of money.
Getting married costs money. Yeah.
Getting married costs money, and I think it's important to have the money conversation.
One of the things that's been nice for us, having lived together for a while, we have separate money, but we now also have combined money, and that
has been a relief.
It's been really nice, actually.
Yeah.
It's been really good. And of course, there's a few sort of things around how to, there's been some adjusting, but in general, it's felt really, really good, because it means, and now when I say we share money, we don't share all of our money.
No, we have separate bank accounts, and then we both put equal amounts into a joint account that we spend for things that, for our house, for things that we do jointly.
Yeah. And I think since right now we're both, in a similar situation, whereas I had have a career and have been working in the film industry, since we moved to Kenya and now coming out, I've done some shifting. I haven't done any filming in a year and a half. So it's kind of, we're both in this similar situation. So in this case, it made sense for us to put in equal amounts. But, if we go back actually to the beginning of our, or earlier on in our relationship, there were times where it made sense for me to put in more. And that wasn't anything that I had to feel bad about or that you should have felt bad about. It was just that I had more, I had other streams of income. And equality, I think sometimes it can be, it's almost like short-sighted, where you think, is it equal right now?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like for us, it was like, who has more, and in the beginning of our relationship, you were making more money, you had more money. And so it just made sense that you paid for more things. Yep. But that needed to be a conversation.
It did need to be a conversation, one that was conscious. That way you didn't feel like you couldn't bring something up or that you had less of a voice in our financial conversation than me. And this is before we're married, by the way.
Yeah. And I just think like it's so important. Like, do not get engaged if you cannot talk about money. Yep. And it's been almost 4 years. It's getting better, but it's been one of the most uncomfortable conversations for me to talk about. Yep. And it's up there in the leading cause of like what causes divorce.
Right. And actually, former head of RSF Social Finance, I did a workshop with him years ago, and he said, citing a study that talked about what conversation makes people the most uncomfortable. People felt more uncomfortable saying, how much sex have you had in the last week? Like you just asked that, right? How much sex? In the last week, 4 or 5 times for us, right? That's easy. And I'll say that here. But you ask me how much money, like what's my total net worth?
I would totally no, I'm not going to, I don't want to answer that.
Yeah. How much money did you make last week? That's much more uncomfortable.
I feel like it's also like really personal, There's like, and when I answer that, are you going to judge me? Are you going to judge me for like, let's say like we're friends and like, how much I make? It's like, are you going to judge me how I spend my money?
Right. Yeah. Or now do you judge me like, wow, you have a lot. Like, what do you like, man, is there like a little envy that comes if you have more, or if you have less, then it's like, not doing quite as well as I thought they were, whatever, all this like weird judgment that we have. And all that stuff comes in a relationship. So I feel like that kind of free conversation around it is just so vital.
Yeah. Talk about money, and we'll keep talking about money so that we can make it not as awkward and uncomfortable.
I'm actually just going to say one last thing is that there are certain things around money that we didn't disclose right away in our relationship. There were a few things that kind of like came out for both of us, like either something like there's this thing that I haven't told you yet that I need to tell you, or just like not even that, just like I can avoid talking about it because it's never come up and I'm going to make sure it doesn't come up. Right?
Or sometimes you think like, I don't want to share this because it's none of their business. It's,
This is my thing.
This is my thing. This is my choice. But the thing is, like, once you get engaged, you get married, then it's actually not your thing. It's both of your thing, especially in where we live.
Right.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So talk about money.
Talk about money.